Are you a family first business or a business first family? Family businesses contribute approximately 57% of the US GDP and employ about 63% of the workforce, which translates to over 98 million employees in the United States. So I venture to bet that if you're listening to this podcast, in one way or another, you might be connected to a family business. Family-owned businesses are responsible for 78% of all new job creation in the United States. And that question that I asked, are you a family-first business or a business-first family, might be kind of intriguing to you. You might be wondering, what exactly are you talking about, Eric? And that is what we're going to dive into in today's Construction Genius episode with my guest, Rob Ferguson. He grew up in a family of business owners and executives, catching the business bug early, and with a career in leadership roles at public and private companies, he discovered the unique strengths and challenges of family businesses. Intrigued by their blend of legacy and values, he researched their longevity and found their lifespan has declined over the past century. His mission is to help family businesses overcome these issues and build lasting legacies. As we dive into today's episode, you're going to get tremendous insight into how to run a successful family business. And not only in the generation that you're currently in, but for multiple generations. And it all centers around that question. Are you a family-first business or a business-first family? Now let's dive into the interview. Rob will explain what he means by that question, and you're going to find tremendous insight into helping you to run a successful family business. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Rob, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thank you, Eric. Glad to be here.
I'm just engaging with a new client where the son is in the business and his dad has built this billion-dollar construction company from, a truck to $1 billion. So it's pretty impressive. And the son's in the business. He's relatively young. He's never gone anywhere else before to work. And then I know another contractor out of the Midwest where they have probably 5 generations of family business that have been successful. And they insist that people go somewhere else and work with another company, at least one, before they come into the business. I think both approaches can work. The guy that I'm talking about, the young guy, he's got his head on his shoulders. He's worked in the field. He's not like a entitled person. What's your opinion in your experience working with family businesses, how that dynamic should be handled?
Well, I agree. I think both approaches can work. Most of our clients, as we help them navigate through generational succession, most of them will opt to having the next generation go work at another business. And actually, they don't even really care what industry, just as long as they get some outside experience for 3 to 5 years. But I do have some clients that they don't want that to occur. They want to get them on board, the successor onboarded early, young. And so I've seen it work both ways. The one issue I will say about having that young successor not go out and see what else is available will always have that next generation wondering, well, what if? Is the grass greener on the other side of the fence? Family dynamics are putting a lot of stress on me. Perhaps maybe the value of me being in the family business isn't as great as I thought it was because of the family dynamics. Maybe it's better on the outside. So I have seen that happen. And sometimes that next generation does need to kind of go out and discover for themselves what's out there, because you want the next generation that does come into a leadership role to be engaged and passionate and motivated and eventually develop their own vision. of where the company's going to go.
So let's dive into this. It's so interesting because, the family dynamic is something that's prevalent in many construction companies. I was chatting with one of my clients this week, and he has built a thriving business with his brothers, with him at the head. And he has another aspect of his business where he's this sort of instinctive developer. The guy didn't go to college or anything like that. He just graduated from high school, but he just knows how to develop projects and bring people together. And he'd like to carry that part of his business on as well. But when he looks at the next generation, particularly his family members, their skill set isn't quite in that area. So it's more limited to the construction side. How do you see people facing, the first generation, looking at the second or the third generation? How do you see them processing the realities of people's talents and skills and how that can actually affect the business moving forward?
Well, a lot of times they're not grounded in reality. They're grounded in what they believe is true based on what they tell themselves. Let me say more.
Sure.
We ask our families when we first engage a very simple question, which I believe is very difficult for them to answer. And that question is, are you a family first business or a business first family? Now, a lot of times we'll get some immediate response. Oh, well, and they'll respond more from a valued center place, like, oh, well, our family, it's God family business. That's not really what we're talking about. It's not value centric so much. It's where are you going to put the priority? And they have to make that choice. Once that choice is made, then you can start making some of these more challenging decisions.
So please explain those phrases, because I think I understand them, but you got family first business or business first family. Please explain each one of those to the audience.
Yeah. So we actually get our clients to define that for themselves. But generally, the family first business is putting the family needs and the wants ahead of the business. So I had a client once. It was an industrial manufacturing company. It's a nice sized business. 17 cousins were involved. It was 100 years old, fifth generation running it. And there was some cousins in jobs that maybe were getting a 6-figure salary, but only coming into the office once a month. Every one of the cousins drove a luxury car and had a company, American Express, but the business was losing money. And so they were putting the family needs and interest ahead of the business, even at the cost of the legacy of the business. So a business first family will put the interest of the business ahead of the family's wants and potentially short-term needs. So for example, the family knows that really it's the business is helping the family live as opposed for the businesses to be generating the lifestyle for the family. So we get every one of our clients to define what is family first, what is business first. And we go through that exercise and we debate it. We get that really cleared, but eventually we get them to make a decision, a choice, so to speak, on what do they aspire to be. Once that choice is made, our clients will actually inform their employees. Hey, we've decided we've reaffirmed we are a business first family. This is what it means to us as a family. This is what it means to you as employees. And then that leads into their long-term strategy. The key to answering that question helps you determine, back to your original question, well, if you're a business first family, you're going to put not the family member in that job, you're going to put the best qualified person in that job. If you're a family first business, you're probably going to put your son in that job because that was a job that you had, even if they were qualified or not.
So it's interesting. What happened to that company with the 21 cousins with the luxury cars and the Amex card?
It got on the verge of bankruptcy and it ended up selling. It was insolvent and eventually sold to a large global conglomerate.
Okay. So the
lifespan ended, basically.
Yeah.
And Eric, you're bringing up a good point. I always get asked, well, what's better, family first or business first? Well, I don't want to say what's better, but I will say our experience is business first families their lifespan can go much further than a family first business lifespan.
Right. It's interesting because in family businesses, you may not have 21 cousins, but you might have one or two. Yep. And many times there are underperforming family members. How do you think that impacts the morale of a business, particularly for the non-family members who are involved?
It has a multiple effect. If you have a non-performing team member on the team, that brings down team morale, brings down team engagement. If that team member has the last name of the family, whether they're a shareholder or not, it doesn't matter. It has a multiplying effect to the negative.
Yeah. So what's interesting to me, though, is that when it comes to family businesses, I can tell that to the dad or the mom, and yet they'll look at me in the eye and say, "Yeah, I know, Eric," and sort of trail off or allow that non-performing family member to remain.
Yeah.
What does it take for people to make that change and to shift from that family first to that business first mentality, assuming that's something that you want to do?
Yeah. Well, that's the reason why we always start off with that question, because we try to get that answer early in our process of helping and advising families. If they truly have decided that they're a family first business, then they're absolutely, that's what they're doing. They're putting their son's needs or their needs ahead of the morale or the happiness or the successfulness of that business. They're making conscious choice. If they had chosen, no, we are a family first business, no matter what, then that's where we as facilitators come back and said, look, this was a choice you made. And are you putting your family needs or your personal needs ahead of the business? And we can correct once because it's grounded in a decision that was made before it became emotional. That's the whole idea about making some of these critical decisions in a non-emotional time before something happens. So when it does happen, you're a little bit more prepared. You say, oh yeah, you're right, Rob. We did decide that, did give us this example, and we are going to have to address this. Will you help us? Or because it's hard. I mean, family businesses are challenging. It's already difficult enough to run a business. We all know that. The leader of a business is having to keep customers happy, employees happy, shareholders happy. But then when you put the dynamics of family on top of that, you got to show up to Thanksgiving dinner with somebody you just had a very difficult conversation with, it makes it even more complex. And so that's why putting in some good governance through some simple questions like I've asked, putting that around there helps take some of the difficulty out and some of the divisiveness out of these decisions.
What role do you think in those businesses that are dysfunctional, as we're describing here, what role do you think a sense of guilt from the founder of the organization has? And let me describe what I mean by that. So let's say I've founded a company and I've worked 70, 80 hours a week for multiple years, maybe to the detriment of my family. And I feel guilty about that. So when I bring in my family members, I tend to give them a pass because I want to make it up to them for, past neglect perhaps, or something like that. Am I speaking to something that you've heard?
Oh yeah, sure. We've seen that. And I think that's the whole idea about bringing in a third party to really frame up what reality is. Because that may or may not be true. I mean, maybe that's true for them, but that's not the situation. We have a mother-son client right now. You described the situation perfectly. The mother grew this business for 30 years and she's wanting to transition it to her son. Her son is actually very capable and has a different approach to business, but she's resisting to make the changes because in her situation is she's losing her identity with the business. In your situation that you were describing, the identity was there, but more guilt driven versus, purposeful driven.
Yeah, it's interesting. You referred earlier to this idea of family constitution, and I can see how that first question about are you family first or are you business first? What are some other questions that you pose to people in order to help them to develop that constitution?
Well, we go down a checklist. One of the first ones that we really talk about is, we'll talk about several, but we talk about ownership, shareholders, who should be in line for as a shareholder. Is it only blood, or can non-blood family members? So we talk about that. Talk about the other one that gets a lot of interest is how does a family member join a business? And, and putting in some rules or protocols for that and making sure that those rules are known as early as possible. We have a very large family client that we went through this, And I think they came up with 5 kind of standards of how a family member comes into the business. And one of those, besides just having some external expertise, they had to have a college edge, not only just an undergraduate degree, but they had to have an advanced degree, a master's or some advanced degree to be able to come on board.
Why did they decide that?
Yeah, and that was a big conversation. And the founder was saying, look, I want to raise the level expertise and education in our business. And I want, if it's a family member that's going to come in and take over a leadership role, I want them to not just be qualified, I want them to be the absolute most qualified. So, and I thought that really served them well for that. And it also, the younger generation, they're hearing this in their annual family meetings, what the expectation is. So it eliminates some of the entitlement feeling that, okay, I've got to earn this. And if I'm going to go get my MBA or whatever the degree is, because I have an aspiration to join the family business, but they know that it's not going to be easy. I'll tell you another rule.
Can I ask you a question about that one real quick though?
Yeah.
Did the founder himself have an advanced degree?
Yes, he did.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, good. Go ahead, please.
And so did the second generation.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So I find that interesting because my thought when it popped into my head was, well, maybe the guy didn't have an advanced degree and
he was trying to put himself onto the net.
Yeah.
No, he did, and his 2 sons did.
Yep.
So he's really speaking to the third and fourth generation.
That's beautiful. I love that. Okay. Yep. Yeah.
So, okay, here's another rule that they put in, which I thought was just brilliant, is that certainly you got to be qualified to get the job. You're going to be paid whatever the market pays for that job. So you're not getting preference treatment, but you also have to have an annual performance review with your supervising manager. You come in. The rule though, that I thought was really great. In addition, you have to go before the family board of directors for a performance review each year. So it's really saying, look, if you're going to be a family member in the business and in the leadership, we have higher expectations.
Yes.
And so, your supervisor is going to give you a performance review, but you're going to come into the board meeting and we're going to also give you a review.
It's interesting, right? Because you've got sort of 2 ways you can go here, right? With a family business. Either the family members are lower performers and they're just there because they're blood, or the leadership puts a higher expectation on them.
Hence, business first versus family first.
Yeah, that's interesting. How do you negotiate those differences of opinion? So again, let me give you an example. You might have, let's say, a husband and wife running a business, and let's say the wife has high standards and the husband's a little more looser and a little lax. How do you work through those kinds of things?
Well, we got to get everybody on the same page. That's important. And everybody's going to have different behavioral characteristics, husbands and wives. Everybody's going to have different motivators, husband and wife. So the key is making sure everybody is fully aligned to what we're up to.
Yeah.
And if a business, we call it the business finding the prime zone.
Right.
And we define prime as a business that's got an equilibrium, flexibility with structure. In other words, if you have too much structure that dampens the entrepreneurship of the business, it becomes bureaucratic, lethargic, and it doesn't grow.
Right.
If you have a business with too much flexibility, too much dynamics, and not enough structure, you're never going to go anywhere very fast.
Right.
You're always chasing shiny objects. So to get to that point of prime and defining it is critically important. And then bringing that to your husband and wife example, letting the husband know that, hey, look, we do have to have a pace in the organization.
Yeah.
We do have to have some structure. So we need to honor that and try to raise the level of accountability. And to the wife who might be over-structured or over-disciplined, needs to understand we got to keep things into balance. We need to have the flexibility of organization to innovate and to grow. But at the same time, we've got to do it in between the guardrails of our strategic intent.
How do you work with companies who, let's say you have a second generation in, maybe a brother and a sister, and they have spouses or significant others, and the spouses and significant others don't like each other? What has been your experience with that and how that gets handled?
In the business,
Yeah, because let's say they have some sort of influence over the business. So let's say you have one spouse who is entrepreneurially minded, as you're saying, and another spouse who's like, I want to take as much money out of the business as possible and go off on vacations. How do you and that creates a tension, because it's sort of a secondary layer of tension that can affect the business in ways that are unanticipated.
Yep. So we handle that through strategy and through the family constitution.
Uh-huh.
And in other words, growth is always a trade-off, right? You've got to, are we going to maintain our liquidity? Are we going to maintain our control? Are we going to grow? So you got to pick and choose. And so the company, and we experience this all the time. The leadership of the company says, look, we are going to reduce our distribution so we can reinvest in the business to promote growth. And we don't want to give up control. We don't want a minority equity person in here. So we're going to manage our distributions down. And a family member doesn't like that, perhaps. Maybe they're a shareholder, but they have to understand that there is governance in place and there are decision makers that make those decisions. A minority shareholder doesn't get to make that decision. So that's how we deal with that. And then a spouse, maybe a non-blood family member, quite honestly, they really don't get a vote at the table.
Right.
That's just kind of how it works, because you can't have competing. If you end up with competing interest, you're not going to move forward, and you're going to end up becoming. That's why I keep coming back to my basic question: are you a business first family? You're going to do what's in the best interest of the business, or are you a family first business that you want the business to fund the needs of every family member or select family? That's the reason we do that.
Yeah. How do you fire a family member?
Well, they're not meeting expectations. And so we recommend
not so much why, but how do you see people firing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the same way you would fire a non-family member, you would you'd let them know where their expectations aren't being met, finding out if they need some help or resources, providing that to them. You put them on a PIP, a performance improvement plan, but eventually they know they're not performing. Now, here's the difference, is maybe they get fired from their position, but do they lose their shares?
Right.
So you can still be a shareholder and not be an operator.
Yeah.
And that's how we coach our family leadership, to separate those two. You can actually be born into the family, and because you were born into the family, you are going to be in succession for shares.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you're going to be in succession for leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. So speaking of succession, let's just dive into that a little bit. Succession planning is something that most businesses know they need to do, but they don't actually do it. So tell us about the best way to go about structuring a succession plan.
Well, first and foremost, start early. You should start thinking about succession planning the day you start a business.
Now, what does that mean, though? Because I've heard that before, but what does that mean? Because when I'm first starting a business, I'm not thinking about succession. I'm thinking about moving some product. You know what I'm saying? And feeding the bulldog, so to speak, keeping the lights on, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So those are all the things you have to do, right? But you got to figure out, well, what are we going to be? What are we growing up to be? Right. And so that's what leaders have to always do. You got to bring that future to the present.
Mm-hmm.
And the way is defining, how am I going to exit? What does my exit look like eventually? That might be 20 years from now, but I need to have some sort of target or goal of understanding how that's going to occur.
Yeah.
And the sooner, you may not have all the answers, but what we've learned through all of our succession planning advice we give to clients, that the longer timeline you have, the more options you have and the more flexibility you have in your succession planning. When we have a client come up and say, I want to leave my business in the next 24 months. You don't have a lot of options.
Right.
You're very limited. So that's why we say what we say. We don't stress over start a business to be possessed with their exit plan, but they need to have a business model and a business plan that does contemplate their exit.
Okay. So what are the essential elements of a succession plan that someone needs to always include?
Who are your candidate successors?
Yep.
And if you don't have them, what's the profile of that candidate successor.
Yep.
Are you ready as an individual? Do you know what your purpose is going to be when you leave the business? Are you prepared emotionally to leave the business, your baby behind? Financially, are you prepared? How much money do you need after you leave the business? And then the second is the business ready for your succession? What are the gaps in getting that business ready? For example, if all the decisions are being made by the owner and you pluck the owner out, then the business isn't ready. It's going to fall apart. So you've got to be able to delegate those decisions, put a management infrastructure in place. So is the business ready for your exit? And then lastly, we look at how attractive is your business today and how attractive is your business going to be tomorrow? And attractive meaning to the successor or potentially even to a suitor who might be interested in buying your business. So those are the elements that we help our owners prepare for.
What are the best ways to structure a business in terms of the ownership when it comes to a family business?
We always recommend keep the ownership in blood family.
Okay.
The actual shares. Now the non-family member executives are extremely important and they can be part of the succession plan. But there's other ways to incentivize and compensate these executives without giving them actual equity.
Yeah.
And the reality is a non-family member executive that has equity in a privately held, closely held business, and they have minority interest has zero value. Zero value. The only value it's going to have is if the owner ever decides to sell the business. Whereas there's some other compensation mechanisms that will provide that executive value as well, but it's just not going to be shares.
Hope you're enjoying my interview with Rob today. And whether you're a family business or not, my book is for you. Construction Genius, effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS, leadership strategy, sales and marketing advice for construction companies. People ask me, Eric, where did you get that title? Effective, hands-on, practical. Well, I got it from one of my clients who took a leadership course from me and gave me some feedback and said, Eric, you know what I like about the stuff that you do? It's effective, practical, simple, and it's no BS. So if you like that kind of information, this book is for you. Go out to Amazon and purchase yourself a copy today. Before you do that, though, when you go out to Amazon, and the link is in the show notes, read the reviews. By reading those reviews, you'll get insights into what people get from the book and how they use it to cause their leadership to improve and their businesses to excel. Grab yourself a copy today. What have you seen as a successful way of transitioning a business ownership? Have you ever seen family businesses use an ESOP in any way? Maybe ESOP part of the business, or what's your experience with that?
Yeah, so we haven't, over the last 15 years, we have not recommended or implemented an ESOP.
Okay.
So I do know of some successful ESOPs, but and I never want to take ESOPs off the table, but at least with our experience with our clients, biggest impediment to the ESOP is, well, who's going to be leading the business?
Right.
I mean, and then what we find out is, well, a lot of our clients are blue collar employees, and they're limited in their ability to make an investment into the business.
Yeah.
They may not have the full acumen of understanding the business. So we come into that. But what we do find is a family member. We have actually two clients right now who are going through this process. They don't have a family member that wants to be the successor in the business. So the owner, but there is a very qualified executive in the business who wants to own the business, but doesn't have the cash to buy the business. So there's a lot of ways to do that, but we orchestrate programs to allow that non-family member buy the business from the family over time through their sweat equity.
Yes.
And it works out really nice for everybody.
Yep.
And we have found that to be wildly successful if there's not a family member in the succession line.
How do you handle a situation where you have, let's say, a dad, you have two sons, and the question is, who's the man, right? Who's going to be the man in the next generation? Who's going to be the president and CEO? particularly when, let's say, the younger person, the younger brother, is more capable and perhaps more committed?
Well, you're bringing up examples that I've experienced. I had a client. They're a Mexican company, very large company, consumer products goods company, and the father had three sons, but the two oldest sons were in line, and he asked me that very. So we built what I'd say it was a 10-year succession plan. The father was not planning. He wanted to retire. He wanted to force his retirement at the age of 67, I think, and he was 57 or 50. So what we did over time, he knew the two boys knew they were somewhere in the succession plan, but they had to work in the business in various roles and demonstrate their capabilities. And in the end, what happened is the younger son ended up placing the father. The older son realized and also acknowledged that was the best decision. And he liked the role that he had. He still had a very significant role in the business, but it ended up naturally happening because they had the luxury of a decade of working their succession plan and training program with the two boys.
That's interesting. Now, when this succession plan was being put together, did the boys have any input into it, or was that something you just worked with the father?
I just worked with the father.
And the father, as you reflect on him, did he have a preference for any of his sons? Because I know that's one thing that parents often struggle with. They like one kid over the other. It's just reality.
They were the epitome of a business first family. He wanted the best. And he knew they were both highly educated, both capable, just different skill sets, right? That's all. And he wasn't sure.
Yeah.
He said, let's just, either way. And he had another role. He also had built a very successful family office. So he knew, okay, well, somebody can go run that if that's the case. But it ended up working where both sons are working shoulder to shoulder. But one is the leader and one is not.
How do you deal with compensation issues then? So let's say you have the CEO, you have the COO, for instance, they're family members. Do you make a difference in compensation, or tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're a business first family, you're going to compensate all family members at market.
Yes.
And so they do a market study and they get paid at market.
Yep.
Now, you also, if you're a shareholder, you get distributions.
Yes.
So you can be a family member shareholder and not an operator, you're going to get distributions. If you have a job, an operating role, well, you get whatever benefits that job brings that is market oriented.
Yep. Okay. What about, let's go to the cultural differences. You mentioned a Mexican company. What have you noticed are the differences between, let's say, different cultures in terms of the way they relate to their families and the way that they figure out this business first family or family first business?
Yeah. Try to answer your question going down a different
Please do.
road.
Yeah, go ahead.
What we have found, the real competitive advantage of a family business over a non-family business is they have figured out how to integrate some of their family values into their business culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we think really brings the secret sauce. And every family has different values.
Yeah.
But when they tie those together into the business culture, it really makes them more competitive and retaining talent, even attracting talent. You even think financial performance, the whole gamut. So we think clarifying and knowing what the family values are. And we really try to lean back into legacy, so we ask a lot of questions about if the founding member is not alive, we try to hear as many of the family stories and understand what are the real values that family has that's being passed on generation to generation, and help suss those out to make sure that it is included into their business culture. Many times it already is, right? It's already in there. Now we have to make sure that some of the negative values aren't necessarily in there.
Yeah. Well, we all know that families are complex and sometimes they don't run as healthily as perhaps they might. So how do you deal with a family, let's say a husband and wife team that's going through a divorce and they're in a business together?
Yeah, that's tough. We've got a client going through that right now. And it's probably one of the toughest things that I think is more challenging in many ways than a death of a family member.
Yeah.
So we have to stick to our guidelines of business first. We got to do what's best for the business, and we can't allow that dysfunctionality to come in. And if it is coming in the business, then a third party's got to come in and mediate that conflict and set up some rules or guidelines on how that's going to be handled.
Are you ever involved in those mediations?
Yes.
As a mediator, what approach do you take when you come into a conversation, and how do you manage your own biases? Because let's say you like one person more than you like the other person. How do you handle that?
Yeah. So I come in, my bias is what's best for the business, always. And so I have to be a really good listener, right? And I have to be a really good question asker. And so if I can get the right questions asked and listen to the responses and then reframe that back to the participants that are in conflict, that more times than not, and I know it's hard to believe, but we're able to actually come to a consensual decision of what's best for the business. And it's challenging because there are so many emotions going on. But as a third party kind of mediator of that, we have to be able to get to the real issue distinct of the emotions and the reactions. You know, the arms are flailing, language is going out. We got to get to the real issue. We got to get everybody looking at the real issue. What I have found, if we get to the real issue in the context of we got to do what's best for the business first, we usually can get to a consensus, usually.
How do you listen? What sort of tools or tricks or tips do you have for someone to help them with this kind of active listening that you're describing?
Listen for intents, not how it's being said, but what is being said. You have, in my mind, that's what I have to do is I have to not process, not judge what's being said, but be clear on what is the intent behind what's being said. And if I don't get the intent, if I don't really understand it, I've got to ask non-threatening questions in a non-punitive manner.
Okay, so non-threatening, non-punitive. Explain what you mean by both of those phrases.
A threatening question comes across judgmental. Like I already know the answer. I already think that what they're saying is stupid. Punitive is making the person feel bad or less than.
Right.
So keeping the questions open with a natural curiosity that has empathy behind it. The empathy means all of it. Being empathetic only means I really feel what you're feeling. I really get what you're saying. Not that I agree with it. Not that I'm necessarily even sympathetic with it, but I actually feel what your pain is. I got you. But now let me see the other side. That helps us get to the kind of the crux of the real issue. And if we can get the parties that are in conflict to at least agree on what the real issue is. Once we get that, go, yes, that's the real issue, not how you said it or not what you said to me with the words. This is the issue. How do we solve that in the context of what's best for the business? Then you can usually get there.
How do you, when you're working with a company and you see them going down a path that is going to result in some sort of detriment to the business, how do you step in there? Or do you, in order to stop them making that decision?
So I spent 35 years running businesses as a CEO, public company. So my natural inclination is to get in and be directive.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I know the answer. That's you're about ready to fall off the cliff.
Yeah.
As an advisor, I can't be in that role. I can only advise. And so what I do is I try to slow the decision down. I try to get them to look at the decision objectively. I have I call it my decision-making matrix that I have.
Can you share that?
We have a tool that kind of says, yes, I'll be happy to. Let's look at the criteria of how you're making this decision. Let's weight that criteria to help you determine the decision between option A, option B, option C. So we can become more objective. But at the end of the day, it's their call, it's their decision. I just try to put some objectivity to it and some logic to the decision to keep them from being emotional.
So when you're doing that framework there,
Yeah.
You're listing the criteria, and then are you force ranking the criteria? Is that
Yeah.
by weighting?
By weighting it. Yeah, exactly. And then I design it where they can change the weighting. They can change the weighting and they'll see how the outcome changes too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so putting that objectivity to it, slowing the reactive decision down so they can actually be making a decision that's based in facts and not emotion is the best way to do it, as opposed to just stop. You're an idiot. If you do that, you're going to fail. Don't do it. That doesn't work in my mind, because they're not getting any more knowledgeable. They're not getting wiser. My job is to help our business leaders increase in their wisdom, increase in their business acumen, increase in their strategic thinking, not for me to come in and do all that for them or my advisors to do that. We want to work ourselves out of a job, not into perpetual.
So then, thinking about people who are stepping into leadership roles, I'm reminded of a story from history where there's this king. His name is Jeroboam, and he succeeded his father, King Solomon. And he was getting some advice from two different parties. One party of the older advisors were saying, hey, listen, Solomon was pretty tough on people. And if you just kind of chill a little bit and show some kindness to the nation, they're going to really, adhere themselves to you. And then the king went to his younger friends and they said, no, you need to be hard on these people, and harder than Solomon was. And he went with the younger advisor's advice, and it cost him the kingdom. So with that setup there, what has been your experience in helping the young guns take over the business and make changes or transitions or handle that whole process?
I do my best to relate when I was a young gun.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my impatience. And I remember I thought I knew it all and I could do it better. And when I work with the younger generation, my job is to teach them on how to lead upwards, how to influence, as opposed to stomping their feet or causing something to happen that through brute inertia or force.
Yeah.
See, leadership, everybody, I think a lot of people get that all kind of mixed up. Anybody can provide leadership,
Mm-hmm.
right? The guy on the backhoe to the executive sitting in the office.
Yeah.
Leadership to me is all about bringing the future to the present. And so you have to do that through your words. You have to do that through articulating your vision and what you see, what the risks are that you're seeing or anticipating, what the opportunities are that you see. And you, instead of forcing it on people, instead of forcing it upwards, enroll people into that vision of what you're seeing. Get them to see it and dream with you on it. And you can influence leadership a lot more that way than having a tantrum.
That's an interesting phrase, bringing the future to the present. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
You bet. So we invented a word here at my company. We call it leadershipping.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the definition of leadershipping, bringing the future to the present. So we're taking a noun and turning it into an action verb because it's an activity. And it is just exactly that. You do that through clarifying what you see, what the future feels like, and you align the organization to how you are involved in getting there. What's your role going to be in the future? So through clarifying your vision, through aligning it through your actions, through your compensation planning, through your assignment of roles, that is how you bring the future to the present.
How do you help a father who is, again, a G1 father who is tremendously successful and has sons or daughters in the company who are kind of under his shadow, and he may not really understand that? It's just the way he's functioned for 25, 30 years with his kids. How do you both help the older generation to see that and then bring the younger generation out of that shadow into their own?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It really is. And so we spend a lot of time with G1 and through coaching, various coaching techniques that we use to get them to consider it possible that this could be the hindrance, consider it possible this be better. And then we hopefully then get G1 to try what we're saying. Hey, let this particular child take a project on their own. Let them fail. We try to teach G1 that failure is important to do. That's the only way you can really get wiser and learn. Just make sure you got a trampoline under them that the failure's not going to sting so bad. It's going to hurt. But we have, the acronym that we use at our firm, FAIL, and it's kind of cute, the FAIL.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's your first attempt at learning, your first attempt in learning.
yeah.
And we try to really put a positive spin on failure because G1 particularly, they won't admit to their failures, particularly if they're wildly successful.
Yeah.
We all know they had more failures along the way than successes, but they did get a couple of things right. And so they rang the bell.
Yeah.
But go back and we help the G1 go, well, let's talk about your big failures and what did you learn from it and what happened from those failures. And that's how they got to their point of success. So you got to allow the next generation a little bit of elbow room, let them have an opportunity to fail and learn how to recover.
So in light of that, when you've got the next generation coming in, what comes to mind is the difference between, let's say, Steve Jobs and Tim Cook, right, at Apple. Now, I understand they're not family members, but I think the analogy applies. Steve was a visionary and, tremendously charismatic. I don't think Tim will ever be accused of being charismatic, but he's an executor and he's made a lot of money for Apple, and he's led them in that way very successfully. How does a company then transition from one generation with a particular style to another generation with a particular style?
I think you have to be really clear on the team dynamics because it takes both. It takes both of those characteristics and then some.
Yeah.
And I think leaders get too much credit for the success of a company. And I think leaders get too much blame for the failures of a company.
Mm-hmm.
It really takes, in today's world, in my opinion, there's so much change happening so fast that you have to have a leadership team that can function as a team and understands the differences between visionary and logical.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to leverage both of those strengths. That's my opinion. Because I know some very successful leaders who are not dynamic. They're actually very, very much introverts, and you put them in a room full, you get them to go talk on the stage. It just sucks the energy out of them. They'll do it because they know they have to do it.
Yeah.
But it's really, really hard for them to do. But they're masterful at strategy and they're masterful at being able to move an organization forward. They do it through others.
Yeah.
And with others.
What do you think? How legitimate do you think are people's complaints about the differences between generations? Is that just a proverbial thing where the younger generations thinks that they're smarter than the older generation and the older generation thinks they're more wise? Do you see a tremendous difference in the generations as you're beginning to work with companies, like between, your boomers, your Gen Xers, your millennials, your Zoomers?
Yeah, sure. I do. I think that there are differences. There's definite differences, but there's so many similarities as well. I mean, when you and I were just coming up, right? We were 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. I mean, we had the world conquered. We knew more than our parents knew. We wanted to go out and create on our own. I mean, no different. But I think today's differences they are legitimatized. I'm a boomer. I was driven and motivated by work a little bit differently than, say, a millennial.
Yeah.
A millennial wants to join a cause or a purpose. I just wanted to get a paycheck so I could have a house and, and a boat.
Yeah, right.
Kind of a thing. Yeah. So those are real differences, and leaders have to acknowledge that.
Yeah. So let's say I'm in the situation where I am a family first business, but I really want to make that transition to business first family. What are some of the first 2 or 3 things that I need to do to begin to make that very challenging journey?
Well, that's the question. We turn what you just asked me to a question to them.
Yeah.
Because they'll know. They know. And it's going to be different for everybody. It could be, I got to get Uncle Ed out of the business. He is just disruptive. He's not helping. He's dragging the morale down. Uncle Ed, I cannot be a business first family with Uncle Ed. Okay, well, let's deal with that Uncle Ed first.
Yep.
Let's do that.
Yep.
So we just take that question you asked me and we ask them that.
So it's interesting, right? Because I think you hit on something, Rob, that's very important, is that most people already know the answers to their questions. They just need help framing it and bringing it out and taking action.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Tell us a little bit more then about your business, Ferguson Alliance, and how people can get in touch with you, Rob.
Sure. Well, we've been in business for over 14 years. We are advisors to family businesses in the kind of lower middle market. They have anywhere from 50 employees to 3,500 employees. I guess, what do we advise them on? A lot of the things that we're talking about here today: strategy development, strategy implementation, business governance, succession planning, leadership development. You can find us on LinkedIn, Rob Ferguson. Ferguson Alliance is the name of our firm. You can follow our page there. You can also go to our website, ferguson-alliance.com, and there's a toll-free number you can call us.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And you have a interesting statistic on your website. On average, $1 invested with Alliance fees equals $9 in value growth. How did you come to that number?
Yeah, so that's a 2-year-old statistic, just for full disclosure.
Sure, of course.
And we took a look at all of our clients. We track the value of our business when we start and when we disengage. Did their value of their business go up or did it go down?
Yep.
And we kept the running total for 12 years, and we added that up, and then then we knew what our total fees were for everybody.
Yep.
And that's how we got to it.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we'll have the links in the show notes to your website and also to your LinkedIn page. And why don't we just end with this? If there's one thing a family business can do to thrive, what is that one thing that they should focus on, Rob?
Make a choice: business first or family first.
Excellent. I think we've done a really good job of diving into what that actually means. You've given some tremendous insights into how people can go through that process. I appreciate you coming on the show here today.
Thanks for having me, Eric. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for listening to my interview with Rob today. Feel free to go out to ferguson-alliance.com and learn more about his business. Connect with him on LinkedIn. All the links are in the show notes. And lastly, if you've got this far, it must mean that you like the podcast. So I ask you to do 2 things. Number 1, share this episode with other people, particularly family-run businesses who need some help. Number 2, go out to where you get your podcast and give the podcast a rating and a review. The more reviews and ratings we get, the more people will see the show on the interwebs. We're on episode 290 today. Actually, it's 293. We're going to get to 500 episodes at least. So there's tons of value for construction companies in each one of these episodes. And I want to make sure that as many people as possible get to listen to Construction Genius. And your rating and review will help us to do that. So give that rating and review, share the episode, come back for the next episode. And thanks for listening to Construction Genius today.